Welcome to the Daily Maverick webinar today. We're discussing cricket. My name's Craig Ray. I'm the sports editor. That's a very grand title. It's a department of two people. But I am Daily Maverick sports editor. And with me today is Judith February. She's a governance specialist, a columnist, and a lawyer. And her interests are certainly about governance in all sorts of corporate structures, and cricket South Africa is one of those that really is struggling with governance. Andrew Breetzke, he's the CEO of the South African Cricketers Association, also a former Labour lawyer, and SACCA, as they are known, have certainly had a lot of interest in this because they've had all sorts of battles with Cricket South Africa along the way, and I suppose in the last few months they've also repaired their relationship, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But it's a broad-ranging conversation. It's a big conversation. There's been lots of issues in cricket. We probably can't get to them all, but let's just try and share. I want to try and share a screen with you just to see a little timeline of what's been happening in cricket over the last few years, or the last year or so. So let's just, hopefully you can see the screen. Andrew and Judith, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so if we go back to 2018, in October of 2018, CSA publicly announced a projected 654 million rand loss over the next 4 years, and that's the broadcast cycle up until 2022. And that was sort of casually thrown out there in a press release, and it was quite a staggering figure when you think about it. And that sort of started a lot of nervous twitches within cricket. And over time and at various board meetings, that number was revised. At one meeting, it was revised to 244 million. And then another meeting, it suddenly was 350 million. And there wasn't any explanation. And SACCA, and Andrew will know this, was one of the organizations trying to get clarity on this. And then I think the big issue, the real straw that broke the camel's back, was on April the 6th of 2019 when CSA announced it would restructure cricket. And that seemed to be a fairly unilateral decision coming from a couple in the leadership of Cricket South Africa. It certainly wasn't there was no consultation with SACCA on that. And that eventually led to, Andrew, you can go into it, but a legal dispute with Cricket South Africa. And then, this legal dispute continued, and then 76 million rand was cut from the player budget. But at the same time as 76 million rand was cut from the player budget last year, there was an additional 44%, or 633 million, that was suddenly in a line item called operational excellence costs, and that hasn't fully been explained either. And Otis Gibson, then on Cricket Matters, he was promised that his contract was going to be renewed, and that was agreed in principle. And the day before he left for the Cricket World Cup, he was told, well, if you don't win the Cricket World Cup, your contract's not going to be renewed. So that caused all sorts of trouble, and we know how the Cricket World Cup went for the Proteas. And the Mzansi Super League, there's been 2 editions of that, and that's lost over 200 million in a time when Cricket South Africa could barely lose money. Then CSA put the Western Province Cricket Association into administration, which was disputed, and eventually Western Province won that case, which was a huge embarrassment for CSA yet again. And that decision to put them into administration also came from a couple in the leadership. There was no oversight there. I suppose the big thing that really led to the sacking of Thabang Moreau was when 5 journalists who had been critical of the organization in December last year were eventually had the accreditation revoked. Now, we've seen today, there's a story that's broken in one of the publications that it wasn't Thabang Moreau who issued the order, but the media manager who did that, which I find hard to believe. But be that as it may, it was on his watch as the CEO of South African Cricket. And then we had a series of resignations from the board, 1 or 2. Iqbal Khan and Shirley Zinn resigned, which was maybe the honorable thing to do. Standard Bank then announced that it was going to cut its 80 million a year sponsorship with CSA. That led to Moreau being suspended. Dartford was eventually named acting CEO, and then Graham Smith was named as the director of cricket, acting director of cricket at the time. So that's a broad timeline, and we've had a lot more happen since then. Andrew, if I could come to you first of all, let's just go back to the beginning. I mean, the issues with Cricket South Africa and SACCA, I suppose it was that particular dispute that brought the issues into the public domain.
I think you're right. I think starting point is, though, for the 18 years that SACCA's existed, we've actually had 16 really constructive years where we've worked together. We've disagreed like a trade union and employer would, but we've got through those disagreements in the interest of cricket. But what transpired in the last 18 months, where there was a breakdown in the relationship that actually started at the Global League T20, when that was scrapped, and the settlement that we negotiated for players, the relationship then deteriorated. We went into the MAU 18 negotiation, which is another significant story, and it was a tough negotiation. Tebangaro made public statements that he didn't really see SACCA as an important role player and didn't see why they had to engage with us. And when we got to the 654 scenario back in January last year, 2019, 654 was a significant amount of money. Never before had Cricket South Africa had a forecast deficit, full stop, let alone one of 654 million. And CSA approached us to sit down and start talking about how do we manage this, which is what you do with your stakeholders, because it impacts upon the players, it impacts upon the game significantly. And our immediate concerns were that we didn't think 654 was an accurate figure. At that stage, those amounts were not included into the deficit. There were problems with how they'd forecast the foreign broadcast revenues because that had diminished around the world, and CSA was banking on getting the same. So we thought it was closer to $1 billion, actually. And that's really where the relationship deteriorated, to the point we were then removed from the various committees on which we sit. That's the Cricket Committee, the Chief Executives Committee, and we have observer status on FinCom. We went through a stage in February, March, where Tony Irish, the then CEO, and Mpilo Ramela, our president, addressed formal correspondence to the president, to the CEO, to the head of FinCom, setting out all our concerns around the forecast deficit and why we were concerned how they were calculating, our concerns around how they were going about the restructure because they breached the recognition agreement, and other concerns around the Mzansi Super League, which at that stage, the idea was that it would be commercially viable and create money for the rest of the game, but it was not doing that. And we couldn't see how it was sustainable to keep it going. And sadly, those concerns went literally unanswered. There was no comeback on them. And that's where we were really left with an alternative but to initiate a court application, which, to your credit, Craig, as a journalist, I know you read all 2,000 pages of it, so well done. But that really sets the benchmark. And it was a benchmark, I've always said, of what I believe directors' fiduciary duty. I think they needed to look at that and see what we were saying. Unfortunately, we settled that in January. With all the changes that happened in December, there was a new breeze swept through CSA, and that matter did settle. So that's sort of just adding a bit of meat into your timeline as to how that relationship did deteriorate over that 18-month period.
And Judith, sitting on the sidelines watching that as a governance specialist, I mean, initially, I suppose, the full picture's not formed, but as the picture started to emerge, what was your sort of takeaway from a governance point of view, how this was being done?
Well, Craig, thanks. I think the first moment we'd known that cricket, as you and Andrew have pointed out, has been in some form of crisis, lurching from crisis to crisis, and the rumblings were all over if one followed the game. But certainly for me, the wake-up call really was that something was rotten in the state of Denmark, was where journalists' accreditation was withdrawn. And that to me signaled an institution which clearly was insecure and insecure in power, and he was trying to close off information to the public. And the moment that happens, all sorts of alarm bells go off, because that's sort of, tin pot dictatorship stuff, if you're looking at it from a government point of view, if it was a state. And the fuss that was then made around that Cricket South Africa didn't seem to understand that it was operating in a democracy, and that actually a lot of journalists would be very upset about it, and also the public. And what has astounded me since the December of last year and that incident is that they appear to be tone deaf to the fact that the cricket-loving public have a stake in this game. We have a stake in the well-being of this game and in the well-being of the players. And it felt as if, the public were completely disregarded. And then, of course, there were the independent directors, Shirley Zinn and Iqbal Khan, and one other who resigned.
On that point, Judith, should more have resigned? I mean, it sort of gave the signal that Thabang Moreau was the law unto himself. If journalist accreditation could be revoked and there was no blowback from the board, that was the first sort of real indication we got that the board wasn't in control or were complicit in his actions.
Well, that was exactly my point, what I was coming to, Craig, because at the time I wrote several articles saying that this board has to take responsibility, because you can't be on a board and then not take responsibility. And with due respect to the individuals who resigned then, it was too little too late. They'd already presided over the game. They'd already presided over matters getting to that point and getting to a point of a forensic investigation. And so this idea of oversight, and we'll get to the relationship between the board and the members' council and our thought that is, but I thought that those directors then left in silence. Shirley Zinn left in silence, and I think Iqbal Khan had written a letter. But Shirley Zinn had also written a letter. But really, it was too little too late by the time they had presided over some of that chaos and some of Thabang Moreau feeling empowered to be able to act in that way and not flexing their muscles. And sadly, that's not good enough when you've been tasked with managing, not managing the game, but protecting it for future generations. And in Cricket South Africa's, in the Memorandum of Incorporation, that is very clear. And I believe that there's been a breach of that on every front. And so serious work needs to be done to get the public to have faith in administration again and the players. And therein, I think, lies the rub.
Now, when this all happened in early December last year, eventually when Standard Bank said, well, we're pulling our sponsorship, or we're not going to renew our 80 million rand a year sponsorship, that seemed to be the one thing that frightened the CSA, and there was a bit of action. Thabang Moreau was suspended. But Andrew, perhaps you would be a bit clearer on this. Why was he suspended? And why was there not just a internal disciplinary hearing? Quite simple. You've breached the terms of your contract, and have a hearing, and within a couple of weeks he's fired or he's cleared. Why did we end up dragging this thing through 9 months? Which we'll come to. The forensic audit was ordered, but surely that's a separate issue to Thabang Moreau's management style and his own personal contract with CSA.
I mean, that is a good question. I don't necessarily know the answer. I do think at the time, December, January, there was enough information on the table for there to be a proper investigation and action to be taken. It appears to have, that period appears to have been ignored, and everything linked to the forensic. That's become the main discussion point around the disciplinary action and subsequent actions. And I think that was a mistake. I think there was information available at the time that could have been utilized, a proper investigation, and dealt with then. And I've been asked the question a lot, how does cricket correct itself over the last number of months? And one of the key issues was this almost sword of Damocles hanging over their heads, the issue of the acting CEO positions, because you haven't yet dealt with your CEO who's suspended, and that just creates uncertainty. And what CSA has desperately needed, cricket has desperately needed over the last 9 months, is certainty and some consistency. So I don't quite know the answer. I don't know the politics behind it at the time, but I do think had it been dealt with there and then, I think CSA would probably be in a better position now. Cricket would be in a better position because it could have moved on. Whereas now we're still sitting in a position where we've got acting CEOs moving into what is going to be a very difficult time for the game. Well,
Andrew, I spoke to your predecessor, Tony Irish, in December of last year. And he said, well, we've probably reached rock bottom in cricket, and it's going to get better from here. And Judith, it hasn't. I mean, it's actually just it's been a year of disaster, and this forensic audit seems to be, as Andrew's pointed out there. First of all, when an organization orders or commissions a forensic audit, what does that say to you as a governance specialist looking from the outside in? Geez, it must be pretty bad if an organization feels it has to have an independent forensic audit for a start. There must be a lot of anecdotal evidence around the office that someone's decided that this is the way we've got to go. So maybe if you could just understand how a company gets to that point.
Well, you get to that point by being very badly managed and having the wrong people in positions of power, and who are possibly abusing their authority, and also where there has been mismanagement and also issues regarding finances. Now, we can't preempt what the report is going to say, but there's certainly been enough in the media around abuse of credit cards at CSA and various other financial abuses for us to join the dots intelligently if we want to. So it would be interesting, this report, Craig, which has been, so it tells me that there's something deeply wrong with systems and also with people who manage it and the people who oversee those who manage. And therein, again, lies the rub, because you've got this members' council, which then commissioned this forensic report. The board went ahead and there is this forensic report. But bizarrely, and I really don't understand this, bizarrely, this forensic report is being kept almost secret. People are able to apparently to go and read it at Barman Gilfillan's law offices, and it hasn't been distributed. They're afraid of leaks. But, this is the world that we live in. And it seems as if it is closely guarded. And from the outside looking in, one can only assume that it possibly implicates other people within the board, within management of CSA, and there is a drive towards secrecy. But unfortunately, again, we live in a democracy, and so that report will out. Whether it's leaked or whether it comes out, it will out. And I'm very pleased, I think, Andrew, that that SACCA have mentioned that they want to make a promotion of access to information at request if that report is not released, because the public has the right to know. The players, the stakeholders have the right to know what happened so that you can then move on. And just the point about Tabang Moreau's suspension, a clean break would have been the best thing. To have somebody on a very large salary, suspended with pay for all this time, 10 months it is now, and then to have Jacques Faul come in and now Kigandri Govender. And I think that, we need to clearly interrogate why it is that somebody is capable and with such integrity as Jacques Faul that there's no place for him within that CSA setup. That tells us a lot about what is going on, about what I think are machinations behind the scene for certain individuals to be put in management positions and also to get onto the board. And that does not augur well for the future of the game.
Well, just for viewers on this webinar, just to clarify, if you don't quite understand, the Members' Council is the ultimate authority in cricket that's made up of the 14 union presidents. The Members' Council, and correct me if I'm wrong here, both of you, the Members' Council then elects the board. And unfortunately, in cricket's case, 7 of the Members' Council are on the board. So there's a definite conflict of interest. Now, I don't know if those of you that watched the England-Pakistan series recently, they had outgoing England board chairman Colin Graves in one of the lunch breaks or tea breaks. And one of the questions put to him was, what's the single biggest achievement you've had in your 5 years as head of England cricket? And he said it was making the board fully independent. Basically, they got rid of the county representation on the board, and it was staffed with fully functional business people who had interest in marketing or finance or whatever the case may be, sponsorships. And he said that was the thing. And England are world champions, men's and women's cricket. They were pretty solid in the test arena. And things look pretty good for English cricket. Now, that's what Nicholson, again, we need to just give some context here. Judge Nicholson in 2013, in recommendations when cricket had another crisis at the time, recommended that the majority, I think it was the wording, was the majority of the board and the lead independents should all be, or the chairman should be independent. Of course, that was never adhered to. And 5 years on, 7 years on, we get to this position where we're seeing a collapse in leadership. Is that vital to the structure of any company to have majority independence? Judith?
I think in this case, absolutely, Craig, yes. And so the Nicholson inquiry, just to go back to that, I mean, that was in 2012, 2013, where there was a bonus scandal within CSA involving the previous CEO, Gerald Majola, and it had to do with us hosting the IPL here in South Africa when it couldn't go to India. So, and there was an inquiry, and Judge Nicholson has a very long, couple of 100-page report on how to on that issue, and then how to restructure cricket. He was quite clear on it, and I was looking back to the statement that then Sports Minister Fikile Mbalula made, where he said there's a cancer within cricket and it needs to be removed. And he said that the Nicholson report should be implemented without delay. Of course, there was, I see that Willie Besson, formerly of CSA, says, well, Nicholson was implemented. Well, actually, no, because what Nicholson wanted was 9 non-executive independent directors with legal, financial, accounting, marketing skills, commercial skills, because I do think that we're in an environment, and Andrew, you'll know this better than I do, that negotiating player contracts, negotiating broadcast rights, that takes real skill. We also need somebody at the head of CSA who has the gravitas to be able to represent us around the world. And so that is what Nicholson had in mind. And he did have in mind some sort of transition from the old board to the new board. But again, the members' council, so really what should happen is this inherent conflict between the board and the members' council, that is to me untenable. And so therefore what you should have is, as Hareen Lorgat suggested, and I agree with him, that for what it's worth, that the members' council should dissolve the board, because after all, it's that way around. So I think last year, calling for the board to go, well, the board's not going to go, because, they'll just go, well, we were voted on here by the members' councils. So, and it's a 7-5 split. So you've got 7 non-independents and then 5 independents. And the last point I want to make is it also seems that in this governance structure, that the company secretary within CSA, from what we're reading in the media, has become extraordinarily powerful. And that to me is unusual, to say the least.
Andrew, we'll come back to some of those issues and certainly the current structure in due course. But Andrew, let's just go back to your court case was set. Tabangmaro is suspended. The forensic audit is ordered. Jacques Fall comes in as the acting CEO, and his immediate first job was to repair and build bridges with the sponsors, with the stakeholders such as SACCA. And maybe you can give us some insight into those early weeks under Jacques Fall, because you clearly improved your relationship with CSA almost immediately after Tabangmaro was out of the picture. If you could maybe give us some insight into what happened in those few weeks and months initially and earlier this year.
I'd like to write a novel about them because they were so interesting. But I think Tabangmaro was suspended on a Friday, if I recall correctly, around about the 6th of December. Jacques Fall came in as acting. The board appointed him over the weekend. And the first thing he did on the Monday morning was he phoned SACCA, and he flew to Cape Town that week, the next week that was, and started, building bridges again. We obviously had the court case looming because we'd really reached a point where we were going to sit down. It was going to be in the next couple of months. So one of the key objectives was to how do we get rid of the court case. And the first few weeks of January, we had a number of meetings where we sat down. And a key element for us was we're only going to withdraw the court case if CSA rescinded the decision, the members' council rescinded the decision to go to 12, because that was the breach of the collective agreement, our recognition agreement. That was done by about the end of January, and the court case was then settled. And that paved the way for a lot of constructive engagement that followed. Constructive engagement, we set up a timeline to engage on the restructure, which has taken place over the last number of months and taken place very well. It's been fantastic actually sitting down and discussing pure cricket things on what does the structure need to look like. But how do we save money, etc., etc. So those initial weeks, those initial months worked well. We got back onto the committees, those 3 committees I spoke about earlier, and the relationship has normalized. And I do believe Cricket South Africa needs credit because a lot of good work has been done over the last 9 months. Good work, especially around just one of the crises being COVID. That's just difficult to manage. And Dr. Shraib Mandra put together a task team, and we were consulted on that. And I think CSA did very well there in terms of getting players back to training now, like we are. And obviously there are many more variables to come on the COVID, but that was good work. And CSA turned a profit in that financial year of 50 million. Costs were cut. The exchange rate helped them, and ironically, COVID assisted them because they didn't go touring the West Indies and Sri Lanka, and that saves you millions. But that was all good work. So I think, sadly, one's forgetting about a lot of good work that's happened at CSA in the past 9 months. And I'm pleased to be able to say that our engagement with CSA operationally has been very good over this period, subsequent to everything that happened in December.
But now Jacques Fall is gone, so let's just skip along in the timeline. So, yeah, it went fairly quiet the first part of this year with CSA, Tabang Barrow, governance issues. We didn't hear much, and then it sort of started bubbling to the surface where what was happening. The CSA board had to present to government the sports portfolio committee on June the 20th. And at that point, they were asked, where is this forensic report? When can we see it as government? And Chris Nzani said then, we'll have it by the end of the month, which was June the 30th. We're now sitting in September and there's no sign of it. In the meantime, Chris Nzani has resigned himself. Steve Cornelius, another board member, has gone. And Jacques Fall resigned as his acting role. This all in the lead up to CSA's AGM. So we went from relative stormy waters into relative calm. And the forensic audit seems to be the smoking gun. Yeah. What the Members' Council ordered this forensic audit, yet they claim they can't get their hands on it. Judith, is there any way that the public or SACCA can compel CSA to produce this forensic audit in the public interest?
Well, Craig, I think, as I said before, you could do a promotion of access to information request, and that would be that something is in the public interest. So if there is information that is in the public interest and certainly in the player's interest, so that's the way that I would go. The only problem with the freedom of information law is, of course, it takes time, and there are also, if you're requesting information, that the individuals involved can, there are various exemptions. I can't really think of exemptions in this case. You could also end up with a redacted report. That could be something that can go. I mean, I haven't really applied my mind to whether one would go to court to compel. I'd imagine that would be quite hard to compel them to bring this case. But I speak under correction there. But it just seems that it just is to me extraordinary, because there is such a one way that this forensic report can see the light of day is if there's public media and other pressure, and also from the players. So I thought that the statement by the players, all the players, men and women's team, about the boardroom shenanigans that are going on and how that's having a deleterious impact on them as players, that's really important. But of course, and certain people within the Members' Council, Sir Anne Villas from Central Gauteng Lions has asked for the forensic report, and that is good. So the pressure must be kept up. But I would go the route of the access to information request to try and get this report. But it takes time. And while we're having these conversations, there's a game that needs to get back on its feet, and we now have another acting CEO.
Interim acting CEO.
Exactly, an interim acting CEO. I was wondering how to phrase that. And so who also herself has been, was part of this management team when journalists accreditation was taken away. So this is not a fresh start. This is, in fact, and then you've got 4 independent directors only at this time, when they're meant to be 5, and also one who seems to be running with this transformation issue. But I think it's the cart before the horse. You've got a sinking ship, and you're wanting to point an arm dealing with transformation. It's all the wrong way around.
Well, we must talk about that in due course. But Andrew, just from the players' point of view, how concerned are the players? Your statement a couple of weeks ago or a week ago was pretty strong. I mean, it was unusual for players to come out and criticize the people that pay them, essentially. We don't see that too often, and that obviously tells you a story about what the players are feeling. But also, what have you been saying to the players during this time? I mean, first of all, you've got no cricket because of COVID, and there's that to contend with. And then secondly, you've got such uncertainty. How difficult has it been for the players, watching this unfold like a slow motion car crash in front of them?
I think as a starting point, as a trade union, we don't like to put players up front to make a statement like that. That's why you have the trade union. We do that, which we do well, I believe. Over the months, we do take on these issues. So for us to go to the players and say, okay, guys, it's time to make the statement is significant, and it is important. The Australians did it a few years ago with their negotiations. They actually refused to sign and was almost on a strike. So it's not common, but it does show the uncertainty around it. Because you must also remember there's something we haven't really spoken about, say, for upfront, is the future of cricket in the country is there are problems. It's challenging, and it's not just South Africa, it's world cricket. So there's so many issues. And Judith, you spoke about the complexities of the organization. Cricket is a very complex world business. It's not just, you're not just running cricket in South Africa. There's the ICC that sits at the top. The ICC, you want to be sitting at the main table with England, Australia, and India. Otherwise, you're just picking up the scraps. So you've got to have a very competitive, good Proteas team. India are far too powerful. So all these dynamics impact upon the finances. And so the future, the forecasts for cricket are difficult. And that's what worries players. They know there's a forecast deficit. They worry about their future careers in a world environment that's challenging, and in a South African environment we have the forecast deficit. And that's why we have consistently said, and it was said in that statement by the players, we need the board, we need the members' council to focus on those issues of how do we ensure that cricket remains sustainable in South Africa. For cricket to be sustainable in South Africa, there need to be a number of what we call cricket imperatives. Like I said, you must have a strong Proteas team. If you've got a strong Proteas team, you're competing with the best of the world, you can negotiate broadcast deals, you can sit at the main table with those other big players. To have a strong Proteas team, what else do you need? Well, you've got to have a strong pipeline into that team. So you have to have a good domestic structure that's feeding into that team, which means you have to be attracting your best players, you've got to have a good remuneration structure, you've got to have a good competitive structure. What else do you need? You have to have a very good transformation pipeline flowing through that so that the team does represent South Africa. Those are the issues we have to focus on, and those are the issues that players worry about. So we've just finished yesterday actually engaging with all our domestic teams. So that's all 15 provincial teams and the 6 franchise teams, and engaging them on these issues. And obviously there's a lot of concern. If you're a 21, 22-year-old who's just got a contract and you're finding your way, you worry about what the future is. And so you'll have a player saying to you, Andrew, must I be thinking about my plan B? And that's not what you want to hear. You want to hear guys who say, well, I'm committed to South African cricket. Here's my career path. I'm going to do what I can. So we've got to get back to focusing on the cricket issues to make cricket strong in South Africa. And sadly, the last 18 months, as long as all these other issues on the go within a COVID environment, it's difficult to focus on those. No matter how committed people at CSA operationally are to doing it, that it will affect any business, what's going on in the boardroom.
But so Judith, go ahead.
No, just to add to that, Andrew, the cricket imperatives are great, and I think we need to get back to those, almost to get back to basics, because also the environment in which we are. South Africa is a developing country, and you talk about the strength of India and Australia and England, of course. But it's also about different forms of the game. And, if you look at test cricket versus the shorter forms of the game, there's all of that going on, this kind of where we're living in a sort of moment where, perhaps, what will test cricket look like in the future? And one would hope that South Africa would be able to take part in those debates and be able to contribute meaningfully. But we can't really do that if we are worrying about whether sponsors will withdraw or not, and will it be worth their while if you've got few people coming. So it almost feels as if at this moment in cricket we're facing a perfect storm, and then you also have other instability in the country around the economy and politics, and so which sort of filters through to every institution and every aspect of South African life. And so really you need calm heads and you need the right people in the right positions. I don't think the Nicholson report was 8 years ago. There's not going to be another chance for Cricket South Africa to get its act together.
Well, that's a pretty doomsday scenario, but well, let's go to the AGM. It's been postponed. We don't know when the new AGM is going to be, unless you know, Andrew, and you can fill us in. But the AGM is postponed because we suspect whatever's contained in that forensic audit has implicated one or two or some people in something, and they therefore cannot be on the ballot, and that's why it's been postponed. There might be other reasons for it, but the reality is, as Anne Villas pointed out, they need to know who they're voting for and what their role in the shenanigans over the last 18 months has been. How do we move forward on all those cricket and operational issues before we solve the leadership crisis? I can't imagine one can happen without the other. So, Judith, what would be the next step? We've got to have an AGM, but how do we get there when we don't know, the details of the players in the AGM?
Yeah, exactly, Craig. And this is where it becomes difficult because, as I said before, it's easy to say the board must resign, but at the same time, you've got this inherent conflict between the board and the members' council. So that makes independent ordinary oversight. In the ordinary case, the board would have oversight over management, and it would just be a very simple accountability arrangement. This is more complicated. And of course, there are vested interests with regard to who gets voted onto the members' council, who becomes the president. And then one has to look at what's happening in the provinces, and then one has to then look at what happens in clubs. And so it becomes very fraught. It would be, if I had to say what a wish list would be, I think this forensic report needs to be released. And I do think that if Kugandri Govender, even as interim acting CEO, and I don't think she's the best placed person to take this job permanently, but she could try to redeem the situation by getting that forensic report. Also, Beresford Williams as acting president to release that forensic report at the very least. Look, if you had people there who were honest brokers and who where there wasn't the politics. Andrew, you used that. I think one of you used that word, and this is the political shenanigans that go on in every institution in South Africa. And unfortunately, there are people within the setup who are not in it for the good of the game, who are in it for what they can get, and who are in it for their own personal reasons. And that's got nothing to do with cricket. And we see this in institutions that are hollowed out all around the country. And so therefore, some of these individuals might not do the right thing. And then we're in a quagmire. And so, you've got, and then there's the relationship with SACCA, because basically what the members' council and board is saying is, well, we can't change the structure because SACCA doesn't want the Nicholson reports to be implemented. But it will be interesting to see what the Cricket South Africa does do, because what they're saying is, well, we want this time to implement some of Nicholson. So, give us all of Nicholson and then be turkeys to vote for Christmas, dissolve that board and get 9 non-executive directors and people who are highly skilled, but also people who know cricket. That would be a start. So I'm very concerned about the remaining 4 independent directors, and particularly the person who chairs the nominations committee, because clearly there were breaches going on, names were not put forward, and that to me seems like political meddling, and that you can't brook that. But if institutions don't take the right path, they will fail, and that's the scenario that we're in.
Yeah, Craig, I think there are 2 interesting points. When CSA postponed the AGM, their press release that came out, which actually looked like it could have been drafted by their attorneys in the way it was structured, but it actually mentioned 2 elements. It mentioned the forensic report as they needed to interrogate further, and it was part of a critical process. But they also mentioned Nicholson, and that came out of left field a bit, because Nicholson had been mentioned by Advocate Norman Arnser, Haroon Lorgat mentioned it in press releases, but it had never been mentioned through the narrative of Cricket South Africa, yet it suddenly appeared in a press release. And I believe that possibly in the forensic, when there were a number of interviews with various players, people probably said, that they should be going back to Nicholson. And that's probably where it came from. I don't know whether it's possible for them to overcome the SASCOC position of cricket must be run by the administrators effectively. I think that might be insurmountable, and the sad point is, it then means we've learned nothing from 2013 to now, because that's been the grave disaster is around the governance. I also think that if you go back to a few weeks ago when Chris Nzani stood down, what is interesting that as president he stood down at that point 3 weeks before the AGM as it was then, yet under immense pressure through the previous 9 months leading up to that, he didn't. And that tells you how bad things must have got at that board level, that members' council level, for him to then stand down 3 weeks before. He must have lost total confidence in then. And likewise, Jacques Fall, a mere 3 weeks before, for an acting CEO, any CEO to resign in a board meeting and say, I'm out of here, can only tell you that was not a very healthy environment that he was in. Again, only 3 weeks before that he had to hold on to. And then Steve Cornelius is another independent who had been on the board for an extended period. He was on the board during last year where we were having our major dispute with CSA. Steve Cornelius was on that board and withstood the calls to stand down as an independent, even when a number of other independents were standing down. Yet in that very same week, he stood down. So that just creates the image of cricket being at war with itself, CSA being at war with itself, which cannot be. Obviously, it's not healthy, but goes to the core of what the problems are.
Well, Andrew, too, based on what you've just said, I mean, the resignation of Jacques Fall and Chris Nzani, they clearly couldn't operate with the board anymore. And I think Jacques Fall came out in a big interview on Sunday in one of the Afrikaans papers, and I think he used the phrase, "It's been captured again." The board, if I translated correctly, and I suppose Welsh Gwaza, the company secretary, has been mentioned, and the lead independent independent director, whose name is Eugenia Kulu Amayo, and she was apparently the one that took out a 510,000 rand advert in the Sunday Times dealing with transformation and the Black Lives Matter issue, which we need to come to. But that kind of those kind of decisions that are just taken unilaterally, it shows that Jacques Fall was losing. He had no control when he's trying to tighten purse strings. And it seems if that continues, that nothing has been learned in 9 months. It seems that the same attitude prevails, that, well, we're on the board, we're in charge, and I'm in charge, and I will do what I like. And I mean, I can't see how it can be fixed if that's the sort of type of leadership that we're seeing on the board at the moment. Judith, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, Craig. So as I understand it, and Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, so the Eugenia Kula Amayor is, there needs to be an AGM so that you can have more independent directors, and that they would be confirmed at the next AGM. That's my understanding of it. But I find it extraordinary that somebody comes onto the board in May, whenever it was, and that you are then considered as a lead independent director. And this is somebody who came from the Estate Agents Affairs Board under a little bit of a cloud of scandal. And I refuse to believe that in South Africa, with so many capable individuals who qualified, that these are the only options that we have to take somebody with a cloud hanging over her head. And certainly this 510,000 Rand ad. Now, what that tells me is the internal controls are missing. What did the interim acting CEO, did she approve that expenditure? It seems to me to be wasteful. And so did she approve that expenditure, or did the lead independent director do it on her own? If she did it on her own, that would be inappropriate, and it would be, you don't do that. Board members don't spend money on behalf of organizations. It's management who does that. So that already tells you that there seems to be a power shift. And in fact, Jacques Fall was quoted as saying that the power shift is between Eugenia Kula Amayor and Welsh Gwaza. And I repeat the point about a company secretary. A company secretary his role is not to get involved in the intimate details of board matters. They are really regulatory people who are meant to advise around regulation. So I'm surprised that the company secretary would be in such a powerful role. And so it leads me to believe that Jacques Vaughan needed to be sidelined because he was inconvenient, because he wanted to do things in the correct way and follow proper processes. And it leads me to believe that one draws the inevitable conclusion that the acting interim CEO, Kugandri Govender, is somebody whom certain directors believe is compliant and therefore useful in the circumstances. And that takes us into the comment around capture. And I actually wrote that in a column that I wrote in December, that this board has been captured. And sadly, that seems to be the case. And then we know from the South African experience how difficult it is to fight our way out of capture, because we see it unfurling at the Zondo Commission and elsewhere. And Cricket South Africa is no different. So it's a real problem.
We've had some questions. James King, I think we've probably touched on them. James's question about the CSA board and the AGM. I think we've gone into that. Dave Minar has asked about the expenditure of the 510,000 Rand on the ad. And Steve Woodward's asking, how do those of us with governance experience get into cricket, I think, is his question. I suppose you've got to start at club level and work your way up through the system. That's how the structure works, I'm afraid. And then Peter Thompson's asked, doesn't the absence of a forensic audit suggest corruption? I think we sort of touched on that. We do. It does lead you to certain conclusions that as long as we can't see it and judge it for ourselves, we've got to assume that some people are implicated in some sort of impropriety. So, keep the questions coming. But we've also got to get on to another issue, transformation. In amongst all of this, we've got almost a complete lack of leadership at CSA. We've got no cricket through COVID and various issues. And then we've had the Black Lives Matter movement come out. And, for all it's good. And Lungi Ngidi was asked a simple question, how he was going to respond to Black Lives Matter. And he said, I want to have a conversation about it with my teammates and do something about it, which was a, measured response and a very sort of simple answer. It's obviously blown up into a big thing. And we've had stories of players coming forward with issues of discrimination and prejudice that they suffered at various times, and some of those we can't verify. We have to take their word for that. And in amongst that, Graham Smith, the director of cricket, has now become. Certainly, there was an agenda driven where Smith and Fall, in particular, and Boucher were targeted as almost deflection from what's going on. It was, well, let's take advantage of this to question those guys. And I can't comment on whether Smith, was mean to Makai Antini or was insensitive to black players. That's between them. But has there, in your opinion, Judith, been a sense of deflection here, using this movement to perhaps take away from some of the other governance issues we've seen in cricket?
Craig, I suppose deflection might be an unhelpful word, because one doesn't want to, and I've followed Twitter, Ashwell Prince, Alvaro Peterson, and various players who've come forward. So one doesn't want to sort of diminish those responses. And certainly there is a global reckoning on race. And cricket is no exception. And so one needs to have a process through which you can deal with it. It's unfortunate that, and perhaps for Cricket South Africa, it's been fortunate because they convened a healing meeting or whatever it was, and out of that came the appointment of an ombud. And it's interesting because I'm not sure in terms of which structure the ombud will be appointed and how that actually, what process was followed to appoint the ombud. And I think that's a question that needs to be asked. And then Eugenia Kula Amayor talked about a reparation fund. And that to me seems rather, I don't know how that will work, because firstly, where do you get money for a reparation fund? Because the game's already cash strapped. Are sponsors going to come on board? You have no governance structure. Who will manage this fund? And secondly is, who does this affect? Does it affect players who played within the South African democracy once the game had opened up? Or, people like my father who had to go and play in the Lancashire Leagues in the late 1960s, are they going to get reparations? How does it work and where does it end? So that seems to me to be something which is hasty, not very well thought through. And then you pay R500,000 for an ad, and you have a shiny which is all over Twitter, gathering of people. That to me is not the deep work of transformation. If this board was serious about the deep work of transformation, it would fix itself so that it could actually deal with development and all of the young black cricketers who are out there in the townships whom we haven't discovered. That would be real work. But we insist on tinkering around the edges and then, we're coming out and saying, we're not going to have any more white consultants and then rolling that back because, no, we didn't really mean that. That's unhelpful. It's not thoughtful. And that makes me quite angry because I think that we are, things get so muddy that nobody knows what anyone's talking about anymore. And actually, we need to get down to the business of developing young cricketers and developing a pipeline.
Andrea, I suppose from a SACCA point of view, maybe you can fill us in on sort of how transformation works through the structures in SACCA.
I think that there are a few points I'd like to touch on. We've met with Dr. Eugenia on the initiatives of Cricket South Africa, and our concerns have been around some of the detail, which Judith has touched on. How is it actually going to work? How is it going to roll out? How do applications be made? And that, I think there's a lot of work that still has to happen there, because cricket is the most brutal of games. It really is. The line between success and failure is very fine, and the line between expectation of my career and where it's going to and where it doesn't go to, those are also very difficult, and that's going to become part of the debate for an ombudsman as well. I think Judith's point is very well taken, is that there are systemic issues of racism, of transformation that we need to deal with in the game. So, for example, we at SACCA, we always have a great concern at the lower levels of cricket, at senior provincial cricket, where I've often said the black African player becomes a commodity. There's a desire, a search for, almost searching for Rabada, as I call it, the next great black African player to move into the Proteas. And so a lot of black African players come in the system and they moved around. They don't have 3-4 good games, they discarded. Their career plans are not properly set out for them. And I do believe that needs to be looked at. And that's going to the grassroots of how you enter this career of cricket, how you develop and how you move up the systems. So you come out of school, there is amateur cricket, but there's senior provincial cricket, and then you go into franchise, then you get to Proteas. And I think there's a lot of work that has to happen there. So in 2018 MOU, we reached agreement with Cricket South Africa on a player development plan for each player, where Cricket South Africa sit down with the top 25, 30 players who are Protea contracted in a year, and they have a discussion about, this is where we see you in the system, and this is where you need to improve, and this is where we see you red ball, white ball, etc., and this is what we hope to achieve, etc. So the player hopefully walks away from that process knowing, well, there's my line of sight, if I'm not already in the Proteas, to the Proteas. I think what has to happen as part of this whole transformation debate is we need to push that further down so that players can understand, well, this is my line of sight, and this is what I need to do to improve. If you look at a number of the stories that came out from the players, a lot of it went around expectation around selection, believing that they were selected and then they weren't selected. And I think a number of players have got legitimate concerns and gripes around what happened to them. I think it was unfair. But how do we get rid of that? Well, there's got to be real effective and intelligent career planning, even at franchise level, with Cricket South Africa, so that all players know, well, this is where my role can be. And I think that's a massive lesson that's come out of this, because at the core of, like I say, a number of these almost testimonials of players is an absolute breakdown in communication around selection and the expectation the player had, the idea that the coach had, and that has created a lot of the problem we see now. So I think there is a lot of work, and I agree with Judith to be talking about the consultants, and that must happen there, but we actually need to work at how do we get players into the system and develop their careers properly.
A lot of the black players, I think part of their probably legitimate gripe is that Graham Smith, to them, was part of the problem. And now he's, as director of cricket, has to find the solutions. Now, that may be so, but is Graham Smith sensitive enough, perhaps, to these issues? And maybe that's maybe not a question that you can answer. But the the opinion is of a lot of players that Graham Smith is not in touch with these feelings, and the culture camp has come along. Can he effectively lead this change that you're talking about, this career path, this making sure that expectations are met? Is he the right person to lead that? Given he's got great cricket skills, but he, to a lot of former players, is part of the problem in the past. Andrew?
Yeah, I think every person's going to learn on the job. I think Graham, this sort of came from almost a tangent as well. He was working this direction. This came along, and he's had to deal with it. And I think a lot of what he's done around the culture camp and our engagement with players around what happened on that culture camp was very constructive. And that was something he wanted. He drove that and said, let's do this, and let's listen. And I do know, because I had the discussions with him when Graham came into the position, and I sat down in sort of January, February with him. One of the first things that was on the table was, how's this transformation pipeline working? Where are these players coming through the system? So to think that Graham Smith came in and said, okay, let me look at the Proteas and I'm not interested in transformation, I think is unfair. Because I know in our initial meetings, he was talking about his concern around the volumes of millions that are spent on transformation, yet how are these players coming through the system? So he identified that very early on. So I don't think he's out of touch with what needs to be done. So in some ways, I think that criticism is unfair. Do I think he's probably got a lot to learn still in terms of all these variables that have suddenly come out and have been thrown at him? He probably does have, but then we all have. Even us at SACCA, we've had to look at our platforms from which players can start saying, hang on a second, this is unfair. And we are having those conversations ourselves. So I think everybody's had to learn. Graham, CSA, us, if we're going to make this a truly representative game for South Africa, we need to change, and we need to change how we do things.
We're nearly out of time. Judith, just perhaps in closing, the common thread here is lack of leadership, or lack of effective leadership at Cricket South Africa. That has been the root cause of where we are at now. Just maybe in summation, how do you think Cricket South Africa can go forward? Same question to you, Andrew, when Judith's done, but how do you think Cricket South Africa can pull itself out of what is a big mess, especially with a financial cliff approaching as well in the coming years?
Well, it needs to, I think the Members' Council needs to have its voice heard. It needs to call for the board to be dissolved. They need to sort out that relationship with SACCA. We didn't get there, but to see how you can have a more independent and a skilled board, and how they might be able to be a compromise. Because actually, as I wrote in my piece last week, if that's not done, and even, so between Kagandri Govender and Beresford Williams, they have one moment. Because if this is not done, we will be fighting over the carcass of the game. And nobody, not one of us who loves this game, wants to see that happening. And I think in South Africa, there's the saying, the best and the worst never happens. So let's hope that people will find it within themselves. And I do think we don't want the Minister of Sport to intervene. He hasn't been particularly helpful, but I do think some pressure there for people to do the right thing might not be inappropriate.
Andrew?
I agree with what Judith says. I think Cricket South Africa is the custodian of cricket in the country. It doesn't own it. We all own it. They're the custodian. And we have to get to the point where decisions are being made that are in the very best interests of cricket. And I go back to focusing on those cricket imperatives. And for that to happen, the individuals on the Members' Council and the board need to start making decisions that are in the very best interests of cricket. There are a lot of good people in South African cricket. There are a lot of good people in Cricket South Africa. The last 9 months has shown that some good decision-making can be made, which can move the game forward. And we have to create certainty around the governance of the game and the operational structure to be able to deal with the challenges that lie ahead. I think we can, but that means all stakeholders have to come together and focus on what is in the best interest of the game.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone for tuning in. We didn't get to all of your questions, apologize for that, but please sign up to our Maverick Insider program as well if you're interested. Just help support quality independent journalism, and the Maverick Sports newsletter on a Monday. If you want to sign up to that, that will also be great. It's been a real pleasure having Andrew and Judith on. Thanks for your insights. I'm sure we can have another one about SACCA down the line, Judith. And Andrew, keep fighting the good fight for cricket, because we obviously got to get back on the field. And, the players need to play. And I think one of the questions there was maybe part of the issues here is that people are haven't had cricket to go and watch, so they haven't been able to vote with their feet, as in terms of show their dissatisfaction with CSA. And maybe that is true. Perhaps when the summer starts and there might be some cricket, and and fans are allowed back, maybe fans can show their displeasure and with cricket. But let's hope they can sort it out, because there's a lot at stake here, and we've discussed it. We didn't even touch on it. There's a lot of stakeholders in cricket, and that goes down to stadiums, people who run small businesses that to service these industries. So there's a lot at stake, and not least of which is the players. Judith, thank you. Andrew, thank you. And thank
you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.